Hello there and welcome to The Ring, Euronews's weekly debate show, broadcasting here from the European Parliament in Brussels. On The Ring, elected members of the European Parliament go face to face on some of the biggest issues facing the European Union. Today we're focusing on migration, with new rules that allow deportation centres to be set up outside EU borders. Luis Albertos has more.
On the 26th of March, the European Parliament adopted a reform enabling member states to set up migration and return hubs in third countries for rejected asylum seekers. The measure marks a significant hardening of EU migration policy, allowing deportations to external facilities negotiated with partner states. The vote unfolded against escalating turmoil in the Middle East that has led to massive displacement in the region. In Lebanon alone, over 1 million people have been forced to flee their homes, according to the UN's International Organization for Migration. Although large-scale onward migration to Europe remains unlikely, the EU is moving towards stricter migration policies. In this context, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz faced widespread backlash after stating that over the longer term of the next 3 years, 80% of the Syrians currently in Germany should return to their homeland. What does the European Parliament's rightward shift on migration mean for the future of asylum? And can the EU balance stricter migration policies with growing human rights concerns?
They're the questions that we have for our contenders. Let's meet them.
Lena Düpont, a German MEP from the centre-right European People's Party. She serves on the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Regarding returns and the third country concept, she said, "The EU must speed up the rejection of clearly unfounded asylum applications. By applying the safe third country concept and an EU list of safe countries of origin, asylum procedures become faster and more efficient, while protecting those in real need." Juan Fernando López Aguilar, a Spanish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats group. He serves in the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs and is one of the European Parliament's most influential figures on migration and asylum policy. Before being an MEP, he served as Spain's Minister of Justice. Migration is a fact, it is not a threat, and walls are not the answer, said López Aguilar, highlighting the need to manage migration while respecting human rights.
Juan Fernando López Aguilar and Lena Düpont, welcome to The Ring. The aim here is to give our viewers a glimpse of your debates inside the European Parliament, so you should feel right at home. So look, let's pick up on that vote. On these return hubs, you voted in favour. You say it's the missing piece of the puzzle. Why?
Well, because it is the missing piece of the puzzle. We invested quite heavily in the previous term in the so-called Asylum and Migration Policy Pact, so the new pact on asylum and migration. And that was always the missing part to that pact. It has been part of it before. It was taken out for political reasons because we were not able to find an agreement. And in this term, we really need to make sure that this last missing piece of the pact is indeed implemented.
But on the other hand, we've seen bodies like the Council of Europe warning that these hubs could create human rights black holes. Juan Fernando, what is your view here?
Of course, we are concerned. Return hubs are not the answer, particularly when they are outside the borders of the European Union. Return hubs have no guarantees of respect to fundamental rights. They are not consistent with EU law. They are not consistent with the architecture we put in place when we adopted the Migration and Asylum Pact. And of course, they give the chance to member states for an economic compensation to some kind of a ruler outside the European Union, keep migrants out of our sight, and that's not the idea.
Lena Düpont, how do you address these concerns?
Well, first of all, your concerns were not just basically neglected or ignored. They had been part of the discussions. You had been, and your group had been on the table as well, but you decided to leave. You also did not support the compromise, for example, from the Liberal rapporteur, and that was also not only about return hubs. So indeed, return hubs are in there, but still in the Parliament's mandate, we have the article on the fundamental rights, which are the basic assumption for the whole concept as such. We are speaking about security cases. We are speaking about really bringing the resources of the member states together with that of the European Union to make sure that afterwards more than 1 in 5 returnees actually is returned, which is the current case.
How can you be sure there'll be oversight?
On the return hubs as such, it's always based on agreements and arrangements which are bilateral or trilateral, multilateral.
But do you do you really deep down trust these arrangements? Will it not be more kind of out of sight, out of mind?
Well, if you look at the debate as such on return hubs, for example, when you're also debating with international organizations, they're also not saying it's not feasible. They're saying under certain conditions it is workable. And it stems from the fact that we know that most of the people actually do want to return to their region, to their country, if it's possible. But if it's not possible, and there are other opportunities in the vicinity of their home region, it should be feasible actually to also return people to there.
But you fear people could be left in legal limbo.
Of course. Let's make it clear. We socialists, we try to be part of the equation, but we're left aside. And the EPP preferred to join a majority with the far-right groups of the European Parliament, which are 3 far-right groups, and they were the ones to adopt this instrument. Of course, we understand that member states are concerned about returns, but return hubs, absolutely not, because they are externalizing the management of the whole issue. Besides, there are no guarantees to protect fundamental rights when they're outside the European Union, because those third states are not bound by EU law, are not bound by fundamental rights considerations. Besides, they're extending the time frame. There were 18 months, but now they are up to 2 years out of the
You're nodding your head in disagreement here, but Juan Fernando López has a point. In the past, you worked a lot very closely with the socialists in this European Parliament, but now you're working much closer with the far right.
Well, let me probably get 2 things straight here. A, this question about the detention is not connected to return hubs. It's a different part of the legislation that we were discussing upon. And for security cases, I do think that there are credible reasons and credible examples in all member states why a prolonged detention sometimes can be not only necessary but needed. Second thing is, we have been proposing, and you speak about the concerns of the member states, the mandate we put forward for a vote is based on the Council's position, on the Commission proposal, where we thought that we needed to protect specifically the European angle of that proposal, and is based on papers that the EPP had produced for a very long time, so known positions of ours. If we are not allowed to put that forward to a vote because someone else might jump on it, then actually we do have a bit of a difficult political discussion. And I very much respect the position of SD here. I know that it also has been a tough negotiations for them, but they were the ones deciding to leave the table. It was not us.
We did our best, as we did, to be part of the majority to adopt the Migration and Asylum Pact. But the thing is
what was your counter-proposal?
Ever since this mandate started, there's been a new majority, the EPP leaning with 3 far-right political groups, and they have been the ones to somehow legalize the so-called Meloni practice with Albania. But it's not only Albania, it can be whatever third country, maybe in Africa. Why should a third country ruler accept that kind of a deal from a member state? Only because of economic compensation? Is that enough to protect the fundamental rights involved, to protect the minors, to protect the unaccompanied minors? Fundamental rights involved? Are there any legal considerations which are actually consistent with the architecture that we finally adopted? No, the answer is not. Of course, we did our best to meet our concerns, but they did not.
All the models are based on a contractual, on a treaty basis. And that, of course, allows the European Union, the member states, on their bilateral or multilateral level to really follow up. We have the attention and the actually also if needed, and I think that this is something that should be taken into consideration, also the support by the international organizations. So there will be a lot of emphasis.
And describe a return hub to our viewers. How would it look like?
Well, it depends on how the member states actually design it now, together with the Commission as part of the, let's say, integral approach also to our third country cooperation. And again, we're investing quite heavily in third countries, not only when it comes to border management and asylum capacities, but, for example, when it comes to economic prosperity, when it comes to fundamental rights, and so on and so forth.
Does that not reassure you that the Commission and the member states together will design how these hubs should look?
Not enough. Of course, we are aware that as to the so-called non-eligible people to stay, they are human beings, and they made it irregularly, never illegally. We object that kind of lexicology because they were not given the chance to make it regular. there have been no legal pathways, and that's been the very one demand of the S&D group right from the outset. Legal pathways should be open, humanitarian corridors, humanitarian visas, legal pathways so that they don't have to risk their lives to make it irregularly to the European Union. Once they are here, of course, you have to tell the difference between those who are entitled to some kind of a human rights consideration, particularly accompanied minors and women with minors and families in special conditions, so that they're given the proper treatment. But as to putting them out of our sight and making a deal with some third country ruler so that they can be somehow piled up for an indefinite period of time in some return hubs with no fundamental rights and with no binding legal considerations as to EU law, that's absolutely against the mandate of the European Union to respect international law, which includes humanitarian law, which includes human rights, as a first condition of EU external action and foreign policy.
And the European Union, of course, fancies itself as a cheerleader of fundamental rights. Let me stop you there, as we are just getting warmed up here. Now it is time for our viewers to get a real flavour of the European Parliament's chamber, where MEPs ask questions directly to each other, and sometimes it gets heated. So I would like to start with ladies first. Lena Düpont, you can address your very first question to Juan López Aguilar.
Yes, for example, how do you actually get that together, that if Spain is going on such a huge regularization program, that it will have repercussions for the rest of the European Union, and then at the same time say we're looking for European solutions here?
First of all, what Spain has done is not unprecedented. Many member states have resorted to regularization.
And have been criticised for that.
And governments of different political colours have also resorted to regularization.
And have been criticised for that.
It's a positive approach.
Rightly so.
Everyone is agreeing on that. Spain is now the locomotive, the number one locomotive when it comes to economic growth and job creation, precisely because it has an alternative, positive view to migration, as opposed to the negative approach, which is the predominant, which is the prevailing side to migration and contaminates not only migrants, but also asylum seekers. So the thing is that when you have a positive approach to migration, when you give the chance to those who are already staying on Spanish soil and Spanish territory, and you give them the chance to regularize, you're enhancing not only their human rights, but also the economy and job creation in Spain.
Are you satisfied with that answer, or would you like a follow-up?
Well, it just basically creates another pull factor into the European Union. That's one thing. And the second thing
does that not create a pull factor?
For me, it's more or less a sign of an overstretched capacity if you need to regularize things because you're not able to conclude procedures as such.
I've been involved in migration debates for so long, and of course I understand it's a divisive issue. But having said this, there is nothing in the right and conservative rhetoric that does not lead to pull factor. Everything is pull factor to the negative approach to migration. When you treat them as human beings, that's pull factor. When you regularize them, that's pull factor. When you incorporate into the job market, that's pull factor. Apparently, the only answer would be expelling them out or having them out of our sight, whatever the cost, whatever it takes. And of course, that leads to an utter contradiction with the values and the EU law which you should be standing for.
Juan Fernando López, your opportunity now to address a question to Lena Düpont.
Lena, I've known you for years. Are you happy that actually this return regulation was adopted by the EPP with the far right? I can picture the far right standing up in a standing ovation to themselves, happy of what they did. Are you happy with that legalization of the Meloni practices, of externalizing the migration management, of giving the third countries the chance to pile migrants and asylum seekers all together in indefinite time, only for the sake of reassuring the member states that we will be somehow countering back the numbers of migrants which keep knocking
So 3 words, are you happy?
Well, of course, as you can say, it was a difficult decision. When we see that only 1 in 5 returnees, only 20% of those who do not have a right to stay within the European Union are still staying in the European Union. And it was always an integral part to the pact, because on the one side of the medal, you have the protection of those who are in need and granted protection. In the midst of the medal, you have the solidarity of the European Union taking care of responsibility and solidarity together. And on the other side of that coin, you have the return policies, because the ones who do not have a right to stay within the European Union, and this is not against a positive approach to migration or a treatment as non-humanitarian. This is just the simple following our own rules, which has always been part of the pact, basically. And you know that because when we started negotiation on the pact, there were 12 regulations in there.
And just because I'm aware you haven't answered the question, so I think you want to ask a follow-up.
Let me make one point clear. Yes, the rate of returnees is low, but it's because of the lack of an architecture, diplomatic architecture of agreements being negotiated with third countries by the European Union in all, which has got a single legal personality. And of course, those returns should be dignified, consistent with the fundamental rights and human rights involved, and preferably voluntary.
OK, we've heard from our MEPs. Now it's time to bring in a new argument to this discussion. I would like to bring in the voice of Eve Geddy, Director of Amnesty International's EU office. She said that this vote marks a growing trend towards increasingly harmful, exclusionary and draconian policies on migration, with worrying repercussions for due process and evidence-based policymaking. Far from reducing irregularity, these proposals risk trapping more people in precarious situations. Lena Düpont, that is the concerns that NGOs are having.
Well, again, we are speaking about a process that has been followed through from the asylum application onwards to the rejection of the asylum claim and forward to the return procedure. So it's not like we are just basically rejecting people on unfounded basis. But again, it's in the pact itself. It is said that effective protection needs to be there. And this is not only a moral obligation, but it's also a treaty obligation, a law obligation for every member state of the European Union. And this is the principle of everything that can be done under the arrangements or agreements.
And we've heard from Charlie Weimers, that's the Swedish negotiator from the right-wing party, the European Conservatives and Reformists, hailing this as the new consensus in Europe, chanting the new era of deportations has begun. This is why NGOs are so concerned. Juan Fernando.
I reject that kind of a rhetoric, for sure. And I agree with the concerns that have been expressed by NGOs as to the flaws of this new policy and legislation that the European Union is putting in place with the cooperation of the right with the far right. It is the contrary. The thing is that for member states to have agreements with third countries, it deters the very possibility of the European Union deploying a diplomacy in itself. And it should be the European Union negotiating with countries of transit and origin, so that that cooperation with countries of transit and origin would have as a result, first, giving opportunities for people to stay where they are born instead of doing whatever, even resorting to human trafficking and international criminal organizations to make it to the European Union. But once they are in the European Union, I insist, they are human beings and they are subject to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which protects not only European citizens, but all human beings under EU law. And they have been applied EU law, they have been implemented EU law in the worst scenario, in the worst possibility you might think of, which is precisely that member states are now legalizing those practices with third countries with no legally binding agreements whatever. No legally binding agreements, just some kind of a deal suffices to keep human beings out of the European Union without human rights considerations.
But Juan, just let me also, from my understanding, because I fully agree with you on the point of the diplomacy, actually, and I fully agree also with you on the redemption of that language, because we're speaking about human beings. Whatever we did with the Asylum and Migration Pact, again, returns being an integral part of it, we're speaking about human beings. So this is the first thing. Second thing, I agree with you on the migration diplomacy. But if now member states, together with the European Commission or bilaterally, trilaterally, are actually implementing those treaties and corporations that you called for with the migration diplomacy, then how can it be bad? Because it is based on treaties and agreements and arrangements that are not only enforceable, but also are able to follow up. If we want to create more possibilities for people to stay in an area where they have a perspective, where they're close to their region, where they have safe and stable conditions, before making the route to the European Union. Why shouldn't we do that?
We've heard from our MEPs. Now it is time to take a short break here on The Ring, but we'll be back very soon with some more Political Punch. Welcome back to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show broadcasting here from the Parliament in Brussels. I'm joined by the MEPs Juan Fernando López Aguilar and Lena Düpont. And this week we're focusing on the topic of migration and the point of return hubs. And we wanted to share this data with you. 480,000 people were ordered to leave the European Union each year, but only 20% or 25% are actually returned. And according to Eurostat, in 2024, it was Germany, Spain, Italy and France that received 70 to 75% of all EU asylum claims. And this comes as 1 million asylum cases are pending across the European Union. So why, Juan Fernando, do you think this is happening? What is causing these delays?
Because you need arrangements, agreements, legally binding agreements with countries of origin, not with any country.
Because if we didn't have these figures, you wouldn't need the return hubs.
This return regulation lacks every meaningful link with the country of origin. It doesn't matter where do you belong, as long as there's someone willing to keep you out of our sight, meaning that maybe some sub-Saharan Africa coming actually from, let's say, Mali or let's say Ghana can be returned to whatever country, to Libya, to Morocco, to Tunisia, as long as the ruler is willing to have them. Is that fair? Of course not. What we need is a legal architecture. What we need is a legal architecture with countries of origin, so that you make certain that you actually returning someone to the country where that particular someone, where actually came from.
But you, on the other hand, believe that the return hubs will increase efficiency and that in a couple of years those figures will be very different.
Well, first of all, again, return hubs is not the only thing that is in the return regulation as such. We are also speaking about member states streamlining their procedures, helping each other out with resources, taking European
but do you trust member states will do that? I mean,
well, member states are the ones asking for that. So I assume they will also then follow up on your own proposals and policies.
Because implementation is always the big challenge here, right? One thing is promising something.
Of course it is. Implementation is the devil in the detail. And we will also make sure politically that we will follow up from the European perspective on member states fulfilling their not only implementation, but really also then driving up what they had been asking for. But again, I mean, Juan, your idea, and to a certain extent, I do subscribe to that. But that would have already worked in the current cases because there is the international obligation to take back your own national citizens. And this is what third countries are not doing in some cases. So we need a leverage. Of course, it is to the best use if we do it together at European level. But we also know that member states have to do some links to third countries where they have a good cooperation already. And the last point actually on that, it's about and this is the part of the agreement or the arrangement then to really put forward perspectives for the people there. So this is an integral part of the policy as such.
Let me tell you something. I chaired the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs for 10 years, and I represented the European Parliament in the Council of Ministers of Interior. I heard them saying, live, fly them to Rwanda. And my question was, why Rwanda? Because only do you think they're black, they're indistinct in Rwanda and whatever African country, no matter where they belong to? The thing is that we need actually to change our look, act more positively, and of course, exert European diplomacy to come to terms with countries of origin and, needless to say, transit too, so that agreements are binding in the legal way and consistent with EU law. Not any agreement would suffice.
And this language, Lena Düpont, that we're hearing inside ministries' meetings and used by politicians is having an impact on society. We've seen an increase in racist attack and xenophobic attacks in countries like Germany.
Well, this was mainly because for far too long, actually, both at European level and also at a certain extent at national level, we tend to not address the concerns of the citizens. And there is an overstretch in capacities in almost all member states. And which is why it is so important that we have a distinction between asylum and migration, because the people you're addressing are completely different. The capacities, the structures you need are completely different. And I think that this is one of the starting points. And what people experienced in the past is that people felt the need that actually we had lost control. What we had been proposing here, both in the pact and with the mandate of the Parliament on returns, is that we put forward a structured and ordered, a humane way of organising asylum and migration.
And it is now time for the fifth and the final round. So now it's time for something a little bit different. I'm going to be asking our MEPs just one question, and you can only answer yes or no. OK, let's begin. Are current EU returns too slow? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
You both agree on that one. Should EU countries set up return hubs abroad? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Yes or no? No, very clear no. Is irregular migration a threat today to the European Union? Lena Düpont, yes or no?
Not as such.
Yes or no?
No, definitely not. It's a fact. And asylum is a right.
But it needs to be in an ordered and structured way.
Should rejected asylum seekers be returned to safe third countries? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Should minors be exempt from return hubs? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
According to the mandate.
Should the European Union prioritise efficiency over individual claims? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Should Frontex have greater powers? Yes or no?
In the returns process as such, yes.
It should have a mandate to cooperate better with third countries.
Is the EU's Migration Commissioner doing a good job? Magnus Brunner, yes or no?
Yes.
Well. I mean, it's not personal, but I can only be sorry to see that his proposals have been endorsed with a standing ovation by the far right.
Could the war in the Middle East trigger a new migration wave here in the European Union? Yes or no?
We're monitoring very actively the situation in the region, and we are prepared.
Yes, yes, and we shouldn't panic. We can handle it.
Well, that was my next question. Is the European Union prepared for this scenario, yes or no?
Not in the current circumstances, not in the current so-called relation of forces, but according to EU capacity, for sure it should. So we shouldn't panic. We can handle it as long as we do it according to EU values and EU law.
What is of utmost importance is that we closely cooperate with our countries, our partner countries that we have in the region.
Final question. Did you agree with anything you heard from Lena Düpont, yes or no?
Yes.
And did you agree with anything you heard from Juan Fernando López Aguilar, yes or no?
Not with everything, but with anything, yes.
Yeah, well, we give a glimpse there of how you actually can meet compromises here in the European Parliament. Lena Düpont and Juan Fernando López Aguilar, thank you so much for joining us here on The Ring, and thank you so much for tuning in. You can write us your views or comments at thering@euronews.com. That is our email address. Take care and stay with us here on Euronews.